You didn't find this by accident. Something ancient inside you brought you here. Not curiosity, not boredom, recognition, a quiet knowing that something in your life is changing, maybe collapsing, maybe unraveling. And yet, somewhere beneath the fear, there's a strange calm, as if part of you already knows. This is necessary. What if your life isn't falling apart? What if it's breaking open? What if the chaos you're resisting is the very thing preparing you for your next becoming? If that question stirs something in you, stay with me, because what you're experiencing has a name, and it's older than fear. There comes a moment in every real transformation when certainty begins to rot, not dramatically, not all at once, quietly, almost politely. The beliefs you once stood on start to feel thin. The truths you inherited no longer sit right in your body. The life you built no longer answers the questions your soul is asking. And at first, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself you're just tired, just stressed, just overthinking. But the whisper doesn't stop. It grows. And slowly, you begin to question everything. Your relationships, your ambitions, your identity, even the version of yourself you once defended so fiercely. This is not rebellion. This is awakening. Carl Jung called this moment the beginning of individuation, the point where the borrowed self can no longer contain the emerging soul. And so the psyche does what it must. It destabilizes what is false, not to punish you, but to free you. This is why it feels like collapse, because the mind experiences it as loss, while the soul experiences it as truth. You're not confused because you're lost. You're confused because the old map no longer works. And that's terrifying when you don't yet see the new one forming. This stage often arrives after you've done everything right. You followed the rules, met expectations, played the role, and yet something feels empty. Not dramatic emptiness, a subtle hollowness, like living in a house that looks beautiful, but no longer feels like home. This is the soul's first disruption. The moment it says, I cannot live in borrowed meaning anymore. And so it begins to dismantle the scaffolding. You may notice your thoughts changing. What once felt important now feels strangely irrelevant. What once motivated you now leaves you cold. Success without meaning starts to feel unbearable. Approval without authenticity feels suffocating, and you don't know why. That's the key. The transformation begins before the explanation. Jung understood this deeply. He warned that when the unconscious is ignored, it will speak through crisis, through confusion, through disruption, through the breakdown of structures that can no longer hold you. This is not pathology. This is initiation. Ancient cultures knew this. They didn't call it depression, or failure, or burnout. They called it a descent, a necessary descent into the unknown self. But modern life teaches us to fear this moment, to numb it, distract from it, medicate it away, to rush back into certainty, even if it's false. And that's the real danger, not the collapse, but misreading it. When you label this phase as failure, you abandon yourself. At the exact moment your soul is trying to emerge. This is why so many people turn back just before the threshold. They rebuild the same life, choose the same patterns, silence the same questions, and call it stability. But you, if you're here, something in you is listening, even if you're scared, even if you don't understand what's happening. Your psyche has begun to withdraw its energy from illusions. And illusions don't die quietly. They resist. They panic. They tell you you're making a mistake. They flood you with doubt. They whisper, go back. This is too much. But listen carefully. If this were destruction, there would be chaos without meaning. But what you're experiencing has a pattern, a rhythm, the same themes repeating, the same discomfort returning, the same questions resurfacing. That's not randomness. That's the unconscious asking for your attention. You may feel like your life is no longer logical, but logic was never meant to lead transformation. Symbol does. Emotion does. The body does. This is why you feel it. before you understand it. Why the discomfort lives in your chest, your stomach, your breath, your nervous system knows, before your mind does. Something old is ending, not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its purpose. The identities you're shedding once protected you. The beliefs you're questioning once kept you safe. The structures dissolving once gave you direction. Honor that, but don't cling to it. A seed does not mourn the shell that cracks. It grows because of it. This stage often feels like grief. Without a clear loss, you're grieving a version of yourself that no longer exists. And that grief is real, but it is also sacred, because only what mattered can be mourned. If you feel like you don't recognize yourself anymore, good. That means you're no longer trapped in who you were. The psyche cannot evolve without disorientation. Certainty is comfortable, but it is also limiting. And right now, your soul is demanding more space. So it creates pressure. It cracks the walls. It destabilizes the floor, not to destroy your life, but to reveal what was built on borrowed ground. This is why the first sign your life is breaking open is not joy. It's questioning. Deep, unsettling, relentless questioning. And if you try to silence it, it will return louder. Because the unconscious does not negotiate, it initiates. And initiation is never comfortable, but it is always meaningful. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are standing at the edge of a deeper life, one not defined by expectation, but by alignment. And the questions you're asking now are the doorway, not to answers, but to truth. Stay with the discomfort, not to suffer, but to listen. Because the moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what is trying to emerge through me? Everything begins to change. This is not the end of the life you knew. It is the beginning of the life that knows you. Something subtle begins to happen next. So subtle, you might miss it. If you're not paying attention, you don't collapse. You don't explode. You don't dramatically reinvent yourself. Instead, you begin to feel slightly detached from who you used to be, not in a harsh way, not with self-hatred, more like you're watching an old version of yourself. From a distance, you recognize them, but you don't feel like them anymore. The things that once felt natural now feel strangely performative. The jokes you used to tell, the reactions you used to have, the way you used to explain yourself, it all feels outdated, like clothes that no longer fit, but still hang in your closet. At first, this creates confusion. You wonder, what's wrong with me? Why don't I care the way I used to? Why does this version of life feel foreign all of a sudden? But nothing is wrong. This is the quiet shedding of the old persona. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to survive, to belong, to be accepted. And that mask is not evil. It once protected you. It helped you navigate the world. But every mask has an expiration date. And when the soul outgrows it, wearing it becomes exhausting. This is why you may feel tired without being physically drained. Why social interactions feel heavier. Why conversations that once flowed now feel hollow. You're not becoming antisocial. You're becoming honest. Your energy is no longer willing to sustain what isn't real. And so it withdraws, quietly, without explanation. This withdrawal can feel lonely, because the world hasn't changed yet. People still see you as who you were. They expect the same responses, the same availability, the same version of you. And part of you tries to comply, out of habit, out of loyalty, out of fear of disrupting the peace. But something inside resists. You feel it in your body, a tension in your chest, a heaviness in your throat. The cost of pretending is becoming too high. This is not arrogance. It's integrity emerging. And integrity always disrupts familiarity. You may notice you're less interested in explaining yourself, less interested in defending your choices, less interested in being understood by everyone. Not because you don't care, but because you're beginning to care about the right things. This is often the phase where guilt arises. Guilt for changing, guilt for needing space, guilt for not resonating with people you once loved deeply. But hear this clearly. Outgrowing does not mean you never loved sincerely. It means you are still growing. And growth does not move backward to maintain comfort. It moves forward, even when it breaks patterns. You may begin to crave solitude, not isolation. Solitude, moments where no one needs anything from you, where you can hear your own thoughts without interruption, where silence feels nourishing instead of empty. This is the soul recalibrating. When the old identity dissolves, there is a pause, a liminal space. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. And the ego hates this space because it cannot label it. It cannot control it. It cannot explain it to others. So it tries to rush you out of it. It urges you to pick something, anything, a new role, a new label, a new distraction. But the soul asks for patience because this space is sacred. It's where truth rises before it takes form. This is also where grief appears. Not dramatic grief, quiet grief. You grieve the ease of being who you used to be, the simplicity, the certainty. Even if that life wasn't aligned, it was familiar, and familiarity feels safe, even when it's limiting. So yes, there may be moments where you miss your old self, where you wonder if you're making a mistake, where you're tempted to return to old patterns, just to feel normal again. But listen carefully. The self you're missing does not exist anymore, not because it was destroyed, but because it was completed. Its work is done, and clinging to it would require you to shrink. You may notice that even your memories feel different. You remember past moments without the same emotional charge. Old victories feel distant. Old failures feel neutral. This emotional neutrality is not numbness, it's release. The psyche is detaching from outdated narratives. And when that happens, identity loosens. You no longer define yourself by what you've done or who you used to be. You begin to sense yourself as something deeper, something quieter, something observing. This is the emergence of the true self. Not loud, not impressive, but deeply grounded. At this stage, external validation loses its grip. Praise feels pleasant, but unnecessary. Criticism feels lighter because it no longer defines you. Your center of gravity has shifted inward. And this is why some people may feel confused by you now. They may say, "You've changed," not accusingly, just noticing. And they're right. But what they're really sensing is that they no longer have access to the same version of you. You're not as predictable, not as easily influenced, not as available for dynamics that require self-betrayal. This can create distance, not because you're pulling away, but because you're no longer meeting people where you used to abandon yourself. And this is where courage is required, because it's easier to remain relatable than to remain authentic. But authenticity is where your energy returns. Slowly, steadily, you may feel moments of deep peace for no obvious reason. Moments where you realize you're okay, even without answers. Those moments are not accidental. They are glimpses of alignment, proof that beneath the uncertainty, something stable is forming, something real. The old identity was loud because it needed reinforcement. The emerging self is quiet because it doesn't need permission. It knows. And as this knowing grows, your tolerance for misalignment shrinks. You can no longer ignore what feels wrong. You can no longer pretend you don't feel what you feel. This isn't sensitivity. It's awareness. And awareness changes everything. You are not becoming detached from life. You are detaching from what is no longer alive in you. This is not loss. This is precision. Your soul is learning to conserve energy for what truly matters. And that means some things must fall away. Not violently, gently, naturally, like leaves releasing themselves. When the season changes, you don't force it. You let it happen. And the more you allow this shedding, the lighter you feel. Not happier yet, but truer. And truth is the foundation of everything that comes next. You are not disappearing. You are emerging. But emergence is quiet. And it requires that you stop clinging to who you were just to feel certain. Stay here, in this in-between. It is not emptiness. It is incubation. And something real is forming beneath the surface. Something that will not need a mask. Something that will not ask for permission. Something that will feel like coming home. At some point, something else begins to shift. Not your identity this time. Your sense of meaning. The things you once chased start to feel strangely weightless. Not wrong, just empty. You still understand why they mattered. You just don't feel it anymore. The motivation that once drove you no longer moves you. The goals that once felt essential now feel optional. You may even wonder what happened to your ambition. But ambition didn't disappear. It transformed. It turned inward. You begin to notice that external success no longer satisfies the same way. Recognition feels brief. Achievement fades quickly. Praise lands, then evaporates. And you're left asking a question that changes everything. Is this it? Not in despair. In clarity. Carl Jung warned that when a person lives only by collective values, the soul eventually revolts. Because the psyche cannot survive on borrowed meaning. It needs purpose that resonates with the inner self. And when that resonance is missing, no amount of success can compensate. This is often when people panic. They assume something is wrong. They try to push harder, achieve more, acquire more, prove more. But the exhaustion deepens because the soul is no longer motivated by performance. It wants alignment. You may notice that comparison loses its grip. Other people's lives stop triggering envy, not because you've become enlightened, but because you've stopped measuring yourself by external standards. What impresses the world no longer impresses your nervous system. Your body tells the truth now. It tightens around what's false. It relaxes around what's real. This is why certain opportunities suddenly feel wrong, even if they look perfect on paper. Why certain paths you once dreamed of now feel like traps. Your intuition is recalibrating your sense of value. And value is no longer defined by visibility. It's defined by vitality. You begin to ask quieter questions. Not, how do I get ahead? But, how do I feel alive? Not, how do I win? But, what feels true? These questions don't shout. They hum beneath the surface. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. This is often the phase where life slows you down. Plans stall. Momentum fades. Doors pause instead of opening. Not as punishment, as protection. Because if life kept accelerating, you'd outrun your own awakening. So things decelerate. And in that stillness, you begin to see how much of your old life was driven by fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of disappointing others. And suddenly, those fears feel negotiable. Not gone, but weaker. Because fear loses power when meaning changes. You may also notice a growing discomfort with superficial conversations. Small talk drains you. Performative connection exhausts you. You crave depth, not intensity. Depth. You want conversations that breathe, that leave silence, that don't rush to conclusions or solutions. You're no longer interested in proving intelligence. You're interested in sharing truth. And this changes your social world. Some people feel farther away, not because they changed, but because you no longer orbit the same values. This can feel lonely because meaning is communal. When yours shifts, your sense of belonging must shift too. And for a while, there's a gap. You don't belong to the old world anymore, but you haven't found the new one yet. This is one of the most misunderstood stages of transformation. People call it depression, or lack of motivation, or losing direction. But what's really happening is reorientation. Your psyche is reordering its hierarchy of importance. And during reordering, everything feels unstable. You may find yourself drawn to simplicity, less noise, less stimulation, less urgency. You might even feel guilty for wanting less. But wanting less is often a sign of wanting what matters. Your nervous system is learning discernment, and discernment always looks like withdrawal at first. You may stop chasing things you once wanted desperately, and that can scare you because wanting was once your fuel. But now, presence is becoming your fuel, and presence doesn't chase, it listens. This is also where your relationship with time changes. You're less obsessed with the future, less haunted by the past. You begin to inhabit the present more fully, not blissfully. Honestly, you notice your breath, your body, your emotional reactions as they arise. You stop bypassing discomfort. You stop distracting yourself from your inner state. And in doing so, you develop something rare: self-trust, not the loud kind that declares certainty, the quiet kind that doesn't need reassurance. You may notice that you're less reactive. Things that once upset you now pass through you, not because you're numb, because you're less identified. Your sense of self is no longer fused with every outcome. And this is freedom, not escape. Freedom from overinvestment in things that don't define you. You begin to sense that your worth was never dependent on productivity or usefulness or achievement. It was intrinsic, and something in you is finally remembering that. This remembrance can feel destabilizing, because if your worth is not earned, then who are you really? This question opens a deep inner space, and in that space, the soul begins to speak more clearly. You may feel drawn to creative expression, writing, music, art, movement, not to be seen, but to be expressed, because creation is how the soul breathes. You're no longer trying to become someone. You're allowing what's already there to move through you. This is when life starts to feel less like a ladder and more like a landscape. There's no single direction, just depth, just resonance, just truth unfolding, moment by moment. And yes, this can make you feel out of sync with the world. The world rewards speed. You're learning patience. The world rewards certainty. You're learning honesty. The world rewards performance. You're learning presence. These values don't clash loudly. They drift apart quietly. And one day, you realize you've crossed the line. You can't go back to wanting what you used to want, not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer yours. This is the moment where life begins to reorganize around you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly. Opportunities that align start to appear. People who speak your inner language begin to find you. Paths that once felt invisible become visible, and they feel different. They don't demand you betray yourself to walk them. They don't ask you to abandon your body or silence your intuition. They feel spacious, honest, sustainable. This is not the reward stage. This is the alignment stage, where life stops pulling you away from yourself and starts moving with you, but only because you stopped chasing meaning outside of you and allowed it to reorganize from within. You are not becoming less ambitious. You are becoming more precise. You are no longer driven by fear-based hunger. You are guided by inner clarity, and clarity doesn't rush. It unfolds. This is why your life may look quieter now, less impressive, less obvious, but inside, something is stabilizing, something solid, something real. You are learning what actually matters. And once you know that, everything else rearranges itself accordingly. This is not the end of striving. It is the end of striving against yourself. And that changes everything. Eventually, something inside you becomes impossible to ignore. A quiet knowing, not a thought, a sensation. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply is. You begin to trust yourself in a way you never have before. Not because you finally figured everything out, but because you stopped betraying what you feel. Your intuition wakes up, not as a voice, but as alignment. You no longer force decisions. You sense them. Your body responds before your mind catches up. Tightness means no. Expansion means yes. And once you recognize this language, Life stops feeling random. You begin to see patterns. You recognize when something is off, even if it looks perfect on the surface. You feel when a door is closing before it slams. You know when a connection is draining you, even if it once felt like home. This is not suspicion. This is attunement. Carl Jung believed intuition was the psyche's way of perceiving truth beyond logic. And when intuition awakens, illusion becomes unbearable. You can no longer unsee what is misaligned. This is why relationships begin to shift more rapidly now, not out of conflict, out of clarity. You begin to notice who leaves you feeling diminished, who requires you to shrink, who only connects to old versions of you. And suddenly, your tolerance disappears, not in anger, in self-respect. You stop explaining. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You stop offering access to people who do not honor your energy. This is not abandonment. This is discernment. And discernment feels cold to those who benefited from your confusion. You may feel grief here, real grief, because some of these people were once everything to you. They knew your history, your wounds, your becoming. But not everyone who walked with you can walk forward with you. Some were meant to bring you here, not beyond this point. And releasing them can feel like losing parts of yourself. But what you're actually losing are the versions of you that survived by adapting, by tolerating, by hoping things would change. If you tried harder, you're not doing that anymore. And that decision reorganizes your entire life. You may notice your social world shrinking, less messages, less invitations, less noise. And at first, this feels terrifying because emptiness echoes loudly when you're used to distraction. But slowly, that emptiness becomes space, and space becomes peace. You start to breathe differently. You sleep deeper. Your nervous system settles because it's no longer bracing for emotional unpredictability. This is when you realize how much energy you were spending managing other people's emotions, how much of your life was spent staying regulated so others wouldn't fall apart. You don't do that now. You allow others to own themselves, and you finally own yourself. This is not selfishness. This is sovereignty, and sovereignty always arrives quietly. You also begin to notice that you are no longer afraid of being alone. Loneliness still appears, but it no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space where something honest can arrive. You stop rushing to fill it. You stop distracting yourself from it. You sit with it. And in that stillness, something sacred emerges. Presence. You become present with your own life, with your breath, with your emotions, with your truth. This is where surrender happens. Not the kind that gives up, the kind that lets go. You stop trying to control the outcome. You stop forcing timelines. You stop demanding clarity before taking the next step. You trust the unfolding because you've seen what happens when you resist it. Everything tightens. And when you surrender, everything softens. This surrender does not make you passive. It makes you responsive. You respond to what is real instead of clinging to what was imagined. This is when synchronicities increase, not as miracles, as alignment. The right words arrive at the right moment. The right people appear without effort. The right opportunities feel natural instead of forced. Life begins to cooperate because you stop fighting yourself. This is the rebirth phase, but it does not feel like fireworks. It feels like quiet confidence. You no longer need external reassurance that you're on the right path. You feel it. You trust it. You move with it. Your nervous system is no longer addicted to chaos or intensity. Peace no longer feels boring. It feels nourishing. You choose differently now, not out of fear, out of alignment. And those choices compound. Your life begins to reflect your inner state, not immediately, but inevitably. This is when you realize that nothing was wasted, not the confusion, not the heartbreak, not the collapse. Everything that fell apart was never meant to survive this version of you. And everything that remains feels sturdy, honest, alive. You are not who you were. And you are not trying to become someone else. You are becoming more yourself than you have ever been. This is not transformation as performance. This is transformation as remembrance. You remember what your body feels like when it's safe. You remember what your soul feels like when it's heard. You remember that life is not meant to be endured. It is meant to be inhabited fully and quietly, without announcement. You cross a threshold. There is no applause, no external marker, just an internal shift. You are no longer asking for permission to live truthfully. You are living, and from this place, everything changes, not because you force it, but because alignment changes the trajectory of your life. You are no longer surviving. You are becoming. And this becoming does not end. It deepens, expands, refines. The signs were never warnings. They were invitations. And you answered them by staying, by listening, by letting go. Your life was never falling apart. It was breaking open. And now, you are walking through the opening, with eyes open, heart intact, and soul awake. This is not the end. It is the beginning. That finally feels real. If this felt like it was speaking to you, it's because it was. You're not here by accident. And this isn't the end of the journey. Subscribe, and we'll keep walking this path together. Quietly, honestly, until your life no longer feels confusing, but aligned.